The fluorescent light above my bed was the kind that hums if you listen long enough. I was listening. It was just after 7 in the morning when I came fully awake in my hospital room at St. Joseph's, the kind of awake that arrives in slow stages. First the ceiling, then the IV line itching under the tape on my left hand, then the low, pulling ache across my abdomen that confirmed the surgery had been real. My mouth tasted like the particular brand of nothing that follows general anesthesia. I did the mental inventory people do when they're not sure what's still attached to them. Everything was. I was okay. I remembered the night I came in. The pain had been building for 2 days, the kind I kept explaining away as stress, as something I ate, as muscles that needed stretching. By Thursday evening, it had become impossible to ignore. My partner drove me to the emergency at close to midnight, his hand steady on my back while I folded over a plastic waiting room chair, and by 3 in the morning, I was in surgery for a ruptured appendix. That was 4 days ago. I was 31 years old. I taught music at an elementary school in Kitchener, and I was supposed to be running choir rehearsals for the December concert, not staring at an Ontario winter sky through a hospital window with a drain in my side and stitches I wasn't allowed to get wet for 2 weeks. My mother was in the chair beside my bed when I woke up. She had a Tim's cup in her hand, and her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and she was looking at her phone with the focused attention of someone trying very hard to seem absorbed. My mother has a tell. When she's carrying something she doesn't want to explain, she goes completely still, like an animal hoping not to be seen if it just stops moving. I had known that particular stillness since I was 9 years old. I noticed it now before I had even said good morning. "You're awake," she said, with too much brightness in it. "Has anyone been over to your place?" I asked. I'm not sure why that was my first question. I'd been thinking about my grandfather's violin in the days before the surgery. His anniversary was coming up, 3 years since he died, and it had been stored at my parents' house for almost a year, because my partner and I didn't have the wall space in our apartment, and I had been meaning to bring it home for months, and kept putting it off. She set her coffee down with great care. "Mom," I said, "where's the violin?" The still thing happened. She went completely motionless, and I knew before she said a single word. My grandfather came to Canada from Lviv in 1972, with a suitcase, $200, and the violin. He was 23 and spoke almost no English, but he could play Vivaldi, and in the community halls of southwestern Ontario that turned out to matter. He played in church ensembles and small orchestras and at weddings and funerals for 30 years. He taught lessons out of his kitchen in Waterloo, until he was almost 80. He taught me. I started when I was 6. He would position my small hand on the bow and say, in his blend of Ukrainian and careful English, that music is the only thing that remembers everything. I didn't understand what that meant for a long time. Eventually I did. When he died 3 years ago, his will was specific. The violin went to me, not to the estate, not to be divided among grandchildren, to me by name, because I was the only one who had ever played it. A man at an antique instrument shop in Waterloo had appraised it at $17,500 Canadian, which felt impossible for something I thought of simply as Zito's violin. But the appraiser told me what my grandfather had carried across the Atlantic was a mid-19th century German workshop instrument in extraordinary condition. He said, "People don't carry things like this unless they matter." I hadn't sold it. I had never considered selling it. It was in a hard case on the shelf in my parents' spare room, exactly where my grandfather used to keep it when he visited them. I had planned to bring it home. I kept not doing it. "What did you do?" I said. My voice was very flat. My mother started to cry. Not the crying that means you're broken open. The crying that means you've been caught, and you're hoping the tears will change the subject. I had known that version of her tears my whole life. "The money for the restaurant," she started. "There was a problem with the equipment financing, and the deposit on the commercial refrigerator was due by Friday, and the supplier wouldn't hold it. And your brother was going to lose the whole thing." "You sold Zito's violin," I said, "to pay for my brother's restaurant." She didn't deny it. "My brother is 2 years younger than me. He has been trying to open a restaurant in Hamilton since he was 23, in one form or another. There was the food truck in 2019 that ran one season before the permit situation became complicated. There was the partnership in 2021 that dissolved before anything opened. The catering company. The pop-up dinners that my parents hosted in their backyard, while I was never quite available to attend. Each time, my parents had been the safety net. The food truck had cost them $8,000 they have never seen returned. The catering equipment they bought him still occupies most of their garage. I had never resented my brother for any of it. I need you to understand that. He is not a villain. He is someone who was taught, slowly and without cruelty, that the ground beneath his feet would hold, that someone would be there. He never had a reason to question it because the answer was always yes. I was the other lesson. I worked through university, 2 part-time jobs, a student loan I paid off in 4 years, a scholarship I applied for alone because my parents forgot the deadline. When I graduated from Wilfrid Laurier, my parents arrived at the convocation ceremony 25 minutes after my name was called. My brother had needed a difficult conversation before they could leave the house. My mother cried in the parking lot and said she was so proud of me. And the story that got told at Christmas that year was somehow about how stressful that morning had been for everyone. I paid my own car off. I never asked them to co-sign anything. When our apartment had a plumbing emergency 2 winters ago that cost us $3,000, I moved it from savings and didn't mention it to my parents, because I already understood, without bitterness, that there was a family financial current that ran in one direction, and I was not in its path. I had been the capable one for so long that it had stopped meaning capable and started meaning invisible. The hospital door opened and my partner walked in with a coffee from the cart downstairs, the way he had every morning of my admission. He looked at my face, then at my mother's, then set the coffee on the tray table, and sat in the chair by the window without saying a word. "The violin's gone," I said. He nodded once, slowly, and looked out at the November sky over Hamilton. My mother attempted several more sentences. There were words about family, about how they would pay me back once the restaurant started generating revenue, about how they had not imagined I would be this upset. I didn't say much. Eventually she left to get more coffee, and I lay there alone and thought about my grandfather. He used to say the violin had survived the war, the border crossing, 40 Ontario winters in drafty houses, and a kitchen fire in 1983 that took the photograph albums in most of his books. It had survived because he protected it. He always put it away correctly. He always said you treat the things that matter like they matter. It had not survived my parents' spare room. That evening, after visiting hours ended, my partner texted me from the parking lot. "Give me 2 days, I have an idea, trust me." I trusted him. I had always trusted him without having to think about it. What I didn't know was that he had started making calls from that parking lot before he even reached his car. He described the violin to 3 instrument dealers in the region before he found the right one. A shop called Hartwell Strings on James Street North in Hamilton. The kind of narrow place with a bell over the door and the smell of rosin built into the walls. The man there remembered it immediately. German make, 19th century. Woman had brought it in and said it was a family piece she needed to liquidate quickly. It hadn't sold. Shops in Ontario hold items before they go to market. My partner paid the full redemption amount. He didn't tell me how much. He used the money we had set aside toward our wedding venue deposit. He brought the case on the morning I was discharged. He set it on our kitchen table and didn't make a speech. When I opened it and saw the violin lying in its felt lining the way my grandfather always left it, I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried harder than I had let myself cry since the night I came into emergency. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "Your grandfather taught you on that violin," he said. "I wasn't going to let them sell it." In the weeks after I got home, I started thinking with the particular clarity that convalescence allows when you have no distractions and nowhere to be. I thought about patterns, the food truck money and the catering equipment. The time my parents co-signed my brother's apartment lease, and I found out at Easter from my aunt, not from them. I thought about every time I had needed something and hadn't asked because I already knew the answer would be slow and complicated and would come with a small sigh. About the fact that I had been in hospital for 5 days recovering from emergency surgery, and my mother's primary anxiety that week had been a refrigerator deposit deadline. I called a friend of mine named Asha, who had done her paralegal certificate and now worked at a firm in Waterloo. We met at my kitchen table, and I laid it all out for her, factually, the way you describe a stranger's situation instead of your own life. "In Ontario," she said, after a pause, "what they did is conversion. Civil theft, essentially. The violin was specifically bequeathed to you in a will, which makes the ownership clear. It doesn't matter that they're your parents. It doesn't matter that they had access to the house." I sat with the word for a long time. Theft. Applied to my own parents. I'm not going to take them to court, I said. I know, she said. But you should know what it actually was. What you do with that is yours. My brother's restaurant was opening on the first Saturday in December, on Locke Street in Hamilton. My mother had been sending me photographs of the menu design, and the booth upholstery, and the handwritten font they'd chosen for the chalkboard specials. In the 3 weeks between my discharge and the opening, she did not once ask how my recovery was going. Neither of my parents came to our apartment. I decided to attend the opening, not to cause the kind of scene that requires raised voices. I went because I wanted my parents to understand, just once, what it felt like to have something taken from you in front of people who mattered to them, quietly, and without being asked. I wore the dark blue dress my partner says looks good on me. I wrapped a gift for my brother, a good chef's knife in a walnut block that he'd mentioned wanting when he first got serious about this project, 3 years earlier. I sent my RSVP with a warm note, and I meant it as warmly as it was written, because none of this had ever been about him. Asha helped me draft the letter. It was factual and calm, a formal demand for the violin's appraised value, accompanied by a copy of the appraisal certificate, my grandfather's will naming me as sole recipient, the shop's redemption receipt, and a clear, unemotional account of what had happened and what accountability looked like. We arranged for it to be couriered to my parents' address, the afternoon of the opening, timed to arrive at the restaurant in the early evening when the room would be at capacity. The restaurant was warm and full when we arrived, string lights over exposed brick, local Ontario wine on the menu, a chalkboard listing seasonal dishes and good chalk lettering. It was, genuinely, a nice room. My brother had worked for this, and I hugged him at the door and told him so and meant every word. My parents were in the middle of it all, glowing in the way parents glow when the thing they've invested in is working. My mother had a new blazer on. My father was deep in conversation with someone from their neighborhood. A little after 8, my father's expression changed. He had moved toward the entrance, checking his phone, and a moment later he was holding a courier envelope he'd signed for without thinking. He assumed it was a card, maybe a late delivery for the opening. He opened it right there near the host, stand in front of a drift of guests coming in from the cold. I was standing near the bar with my partner. I watched his face do the thing faces do when the brain is processing too fast to settle on an expression. He tried to refold it. My mother had already crossed the room, and my aunt, my father's older sister, a retired teacher from Dundas who has never once in her life been able to pretend she hasn't seen something, caught the letterhead before he could tuck it away. Dennis, she said, using his name the way family does when they already suspect and want it confirmed. What is that? The specific quiet that moves through a room when something private surfaces is the same everywhere. People near the entrance went still. A server with a tray took a small step back. My brother appeared in the kitchen doorway still in his whites, a dish towel over one shoulder. My parents pulled me toward the back hallway. My mother's voice was controlled but close to the edge. This is his night, she said. You know what you're doing to him right now. I know what you did to me, I said, while I was in surgery, while I was still in recovery. I know what you decided my grandfather's violin was worth, and who you decided it was worth more than. We were going to pay you back. You said that about the food truck money too, I said, 3 years ago. My father started to say something about family, about sacrifice, about how I had always been the strong one, the one they never worried about, the one who always landed on her feet. He said it almost with admiration, which was the moment I finally understood clearly what had been happening my entire life. You stopped considering me because I didn't need you to, I said. My voice didn't shake, and eventually that became a reason not to consider me at all. Not when I graduated, not when I had surgery, not when someone sold my grandfather's violin out of your spare room while I was unconscious. My brother was in the doorway. He had been there for most of it. He looked, not surprised, but like someone who had known this conversation was coming, and had been hoping it wouldn't arrive tonight. I knew about it before you went in, he said quietly. I heard them talking. I should have called you. I didn't. He paused. I'm sorry, Ruth. He used my name. He said sorry. It wasn't a full reckoning, but it was more honesty than I'd heard from anyone else in that hallway, and it landed in me somewhere quiet and real. This was never about the restaurant, I told my parents. You can pay me back every dollar and it still won't fix what this showed me. I need you to actually see me, to treat me like I matter as much as he does without a crisis forcing you to remember I exist. Until that changes, I'm going to be more careful about where I put my energy, not out of anger, out of self-respect. I walked back through the restaurant, past the string lights and the seasonal menu, and the table of family friends who were studying their wine very carefully, and I didn't look back. What followed wasn't a clean resolution. Nothing real ever is. My father called 3 days later. He came to our apartment alone without my mother and sat at our kitchen table and said plainly that he had been wrong. No preamble, no justification, just, I was wrong. I should have asked you first. I'm sorry. He brought a check for the full appraised value. I hadn't asked him to. He said he had spoken with his sister the morning after the opening, and her exact words to him were, "You have 2 children, act like it." My mother's apology arrived later and came wrapped in a small amount of context, a slight implication that I could have chosen a less public moment to raise a legitimate concern. I accepted it for what it was. People apologize at the level of their own self-awareness, and you cannot force that level higher by wanting it to be. My brother and I had coffee together the following week, just us, at a place on King Street. He said he had spent a lot of time thinking about what he'd been handed without ever being asked to notice the cost, that he wanted to do better at noticing. I don't know yet what that looks like over time. But he said it without prompting and while looking directly at me, and that was something I hadn't had from him before. The violin is home now. My partner built a wall bracket for it in the corner of the living room, where the afternoon light comes through the west window. I play it some evenings. The pieces my grandfather taught me first, the simple ones for small hands that don't know yet what they're doing. I can still feel the shape of his instructions in my fingers after 25 years, the particular way he adjusted my elbow, the way he said, every time without variation, that you don't force the sound, you invite it. He used to say music is the only thing that remembers everything. I think what he meant was that some things carry what language can't hold. The weight of a crossing, a life built from almost nothing, everything a person chose to protect. Some things are worth protecting in return. Some things are worth the quiet, difficult work of saying, this matters and so do I, and I am not going to keep making it easy for you to forget that. I am not an afterthought. I decided that once, in a back hallway on Lock Street in December, with the sound of a live room behind me and a dish towel on my brother's shoulder, and $17,500 of German spruce and maple resting safely at home on a wall I finally brought it to. I'm not planning to let anyone move it again.